Comings and goings all across college football, and that's the case also at Notre Dame with 6-year eligibility and also the transfer portal in play, making this an offseason unlike any other. We got Nick Shipkowski on the line from Irish Wired ND. Nick, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. I appreciate the invite. How are you doing, Mark?
Doing well, and let's break it down. And before we get to the personnel changes and all the moves being made in the offseason, of course, Notre Dame elevates into the Final Four in college football for a second time in 3 seasons. Your thoughts about the much debated topic of the gap between what could be called the elite and Notre Dame and where that stands. And Brian Kelly, of course, made a number of comments after the Alabama game, and just your take on the whole situation.
Well, I think when you look at it, Brian Kelly, his comments weren't popular, ticked a lot of people off, saying the bar needs to be raised. You can't be making excuses. But what he said is also accurate. I mean, you look at Notre Dame, and outside of Alabama, outside of Clemson, who have won multiple national championships in recent years, LSU has one to their name here recently. Ohio State has won, made the title game again this year. Who has Notre Dame not been on par with here the last 4 seasons? Maybe Oklahoma. Oklahoma hasn't won a playoff game when they've gotten there. They had the Classic against Georgia in the Rose Bowl, have a couple Heisman Trophy winners, but they're yet to advance when they get there. There's been some routes in not in their favor in those games as well. He's turned this program around. He's made them into a perennial top 10 team, sometimes top 5 team the last few years as well. You've seen those finishes, but he hasn't gotten over the hump. And I think that it's easy to sit and complain and look and say, well, Lou Holtz won a national championship. Dan Devine even won a national championship. Compare him to Ara Parseghian, all the legends in Notre Dame, and say, well, Brian Kelly hasn't done this. He hasn't accomplished this. And you're right, he hasn't accomplished that. But if you look at the years, roughly the 15, 16 years before he took this job, where Notre Dame was under Bob Davie, under Tyrone Willingham, under Charlie Weiss, it was a program that, it's great if they finish in the top 10. He's raised that significantly to have top 10 be an expectation going into each year, to have college football playoff be a realistic dream, not a what the BCS was under Charlie Weiss of like, oh my God, it'd be amazing if they could get to a BCS game, or under Tyrone Willingham. He has upped the standard a significant amount, and he has done a tremendous job there in terms of doing that. And I think that he got a lot of blame and criticism for something that I think that he said that was pretty accurate at the end of the day.
Yeah, the offensive line has consistently been one of the best in the nation, producing NFL player after NFL player. The defense, since bottoming out in 2016, has significantly been upgraded. Would it be those game-changing guys on the perimeter? Would that be the difference between where Notre Dame is and a couple of the teams that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think in terms of overall just big-time playmakers, when you see guys taken that are going to be towards the top of the draft at skill set positions, how many of them from Notre Dame can you look at? That can be defensive ends. I'm not just saying that it has to be a wide receiver or a running back, but it can be just great defensive ends that are racking up a ton of sacks. Notre Dame's had good defensive lines. Have they had those elite prospects at defensive end that can be a game-changing position? No, not so much. They've had good, maybe not great. As a unit, they've played very well, but they haven't had that kind of one first-round pick type of guy here the last few years. Look at the wide receiving group, and they've had good players there. Again, guys that have gotten drafted, played in the league for a bit, but not anyone that's going to be considered to be taken in a first or second round pick. They haven't had those kind of elite players since really it was Michael Floyd and Golden Tate back at the end of Charlie Weiss's run that were those kind of standard that were there. They've lacked that. Running back wise, they've had some good players there. Josh Adams had a Heisman campaign just a few short years ago and has went on to cash some checks in the NFL, but he's by no means like a game breaker at the next level. Kyron Williams is a very nice player. They developed him this past year. He went in as a relative unknown just because he didn't have carries the season previous and turned into one of the best running backs in the ACC. Probably, if you're ranking him, he's probably in that discussion for the 3rd best running back in the ACC last year. And that's great, but I don't know if Kyron Williams is as much the game breaker, game changer at the position when you look at some of the guys that get taken first, second round draft picks, whether it's Ezekiel Elliott in years past, name a Wisconsin running back in years past. There's plenty of those to go by. They haven't had that guy. And I think at the quarterback position, it's obvious when you see Notre Dame take on a Clemson, take on an Alabama. Ian Book did a lot of great things, set records at Notre Dame, got criticized for a lot of things that he wasn't. And I think people didn't appreciate what he was, and he might be missed here a bit this year. But I think there's an obvious gap there in terms of talent, too, of what Notre Dame's produced at quarterback and what the truly elites have done here year after year after year.